Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Today is Monday, February 5th. It is officially Super Bowl week, so we are going to be kicking off the show with me giving my first thoughts on Super Bowl 58. Then we're going to be sticking with the NFL and talking about some NFL draft buzz. There was some news in the league that happened late last week within the Washington Commanders organization that could possibly help jumpstart them to move up in the draft to the number one pick. There's been some rumors about Caleb Williams where he wants to play, so we will be touching on that. Then in the second half of the show, we will be talking about the NBA as the trade deadline is approaching this week. So I will be giving my thoughts on which teams I think should make moves, whether teams should be buying or selling. And then we're going to finish off the show with a little baseball talk with the Boston Red Sox, my Boston Red Sox, and the way that they have sort of treated themselves this season and the drama that's been going on behind the scenes as their ownership group has been investing into other endeavors and sort of leaving Red Sox fans out to dry. So we're going to be covering all of that. But before we start the show, just a reminder to like and follow and to use the chat to make this show as interactive as possible, and use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker to help get your questions the priority they deserve. Without further ado, getting into our first topic here, which is the Super Bowl, and giving the first initial thoughts heading into this week. We're going to be talking about this Super Bowl, of course, a lot throughout the week. So I don't want to give any of my full-blown predictions just yet, but just want to sort of talk about some of the storylines and the things to watch heading into this week. Coming into today's show, the San Francisco 49ers are currently 1.5 point favorites on ESPN Bet. This has since moved because I believe when it initially came out, the 49ers were 2.5 point favorites, but it has then moved in the direction of the Chiefs. To be honest, I was surprised that the Chiefs were not favored in this game. It sort of makes sense, but just the way that these past couple weeks have played out, I don't think that the 49ers have looked particularly great through their first couple wins. I thought that they were outplayed by the Packers in the divisional round for the majority of the game before coming back to win that game. And then obviously the first half of the game in conference championship weekend against the Lions, it was a very brutal first half for them, but they were able to come back in that one as well. And you absolutely have to give them credit for the resiliency that they showed in both of those games, but I just don't think that they looked particularly great. Now, they of course have a loaded roster, and I think that the Chiefs still sort of have some unsolved questions going in on their end. Yes, their offense has looked tremendously better than what they did for a lot of the regular season, but I don't know if all of those questions have fully been answered. Now, in their first two playoff games, they looked much more Chiefs-like that we've seen during this Patrick Mahomes era, but they were also playing Miami Dolphins defense that had a lot of injuries, and then the same against the Buffalo Bills, where they were missing practically all of their linebackers, their number one cornerback. So they were sort of able to take advantage of the matchups that they were slated up against. And then last week, playing the number one scoring defense in the NFL in the Baltimore Ravens, they came out and they looked tremendous for their first two drives, scoring touchdowns on both of those drives. And obviously between the mind of Andy Reid and the talent of Patrick Mahomes, they are a very good on-script team. The question is once things sort of get muddied up a little bit, do they have those playmakers surrounding Patrick Mahomes to actually overcome some of the adversities that you face throughout the course of a game. And last week, specifically against the Ravens, we saw Travis Kelce coming up in huge moments for them on the regular, whether it be third downs or the drive right before the end of the first half, where he had a couple really big plays to help get them within field goal range. But as a whole with these Chiefs, I do think that it's fair to question their offense and whether or not they have the firepower outside of a Travis Kelce, who again has looked rejuvenated and he's looked great through these few playoff wins, but also, really fell off is not the right term to use here, but he was a lot more limited throughout the course of the year. Now he was dealing with some injuries. We've talked at length about his age now for his position and the injuries that he's dealing with. It's obviously not easy by any means, but it is something where and it's also just funny because we talk about the fact that the Chiefs, and even going back to their playoff run last year, the thought is, oh, it's so easy. You just have to stop Travis Kelce and you can stop the Chiefs offense. And yet Travis Kelce is always running open and he's always making big plays for them. So it's obviously not that simple to just take Travis Kelce out of the game. But both of these teams have, beat good opponents and have made their way to the Super Bowl. I guess it just sort of speaks to the way that the NFL was as a whole this year. Just the fact that both of these teams are flawed in some way, and there really wasn't just the absolute juggernaut of a squad. I guess, first thoughts is the 49ers were probably closest to it, but their front seven has not been quite as dominant as we were expecting. I love their linebacker duo between Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, but their front line with all these names, just sort of the lack of production when it comes to rushing the passer. Nick Bosa, we know how great he is. They bring in Chase Young, former number 2 overall pick, had an incredible rookie season, but he's been fine for them too. It's not that he's been bad, but he's a name that you would expect that they're getting more out of the group. It's Javon Hargrave, who they dished out a contract to, who again has been fine. And then it is Eric Armstead, who, he's been dealing with a little bit of injuries along with this process. But, just for those 4 names that I just gave, you would think that they would be getting more out of the pass rush and also the run stop game, especially with those 2 linebackers backing them up than they have been. But that has not been the case. The Packers ran all over them, and specifically in the first half, the Lions had a ton of success up front as well. They won that line of scrimmage. I think that the line of scrimmage is going to have a very big deal in the Super Bowl matchup as well, where both of these teams have been susceptible to the run. We've been talking about it with the Chiefs for weeks, about how I think that they are vulnerable in the run game. Now, credit to them for stepping up late in that Bills game and being able to shut down James Cook. He only had 4 carries in the fourth quarter and really limited that attack as a whole. And then, again, it's just some of these conversations that came out about the coming after the Chiefs and the Ravens championship game was a lot of people got on the case of their offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, and their head coach, Jim Harbaugh, for not running the ball enough. And that's true. The lack of handoffs, I think it was 6 to their running backs as well as another 2 to their wide receiver, Zay Flowers. But they abandoned their run game, and that was sort of supposed to be the big key to this game, and it just never really came to fruition there. So instead, obviously they were trying to throw it, and with that secondary that the Chiefs have, it is incredible. So coming into this game, you would like to think that the 49ers are going to be able to run the ball on the Chiefs. I think that, especially early on, that should be their focus. We saw sort of, as good as Brock Purdy was down the stretch of that championship game against the Lions, we sort of saw that offense as a whole in the Niners get into their groove when it was Shanahan drawing up plays for their primary playmakers. Deebo Samuel, who was very quiet in the first half, they were looking to get to him early in the second half, get him going, and along with Christian McCaffrey, who was a little bit quieter in the first half because as they obviously scored some points, got some stops on defense, they were allowed to sort of settle back into their game more. And then from there, it's not quite as simple as anything Brock Purdy can give them is a positive, but it is a little bit of a benefit that they have so much that you can get done with a Deebo and with a Christian McCaffrey, that then this comes to Brock Purdy, who once he does start making plays, this offense just takes off to another level. And I think that obviously Purdy becomes a very big conversation heading into this Super Bowl, where it was this exact matchup just a handful of years ago. I know that there's obviously been a lot of roster turnover within the past 4 years or so that it's been. They played in the 2019 Super Bowl. 2019 Super Bowl, I think, off the top of my head. But, a lot has changed specifically, though, at quarterback for the 49ers, where you're going from a Jimmy Garoppolo that you're throwing the ball 11, 13 times, whatever the number was, in the NFC Championship game, granted a blowout against the Packers, but then coming into the Super Bowl with a guy that Shanahan was never really on record of being a huge fan of, and it seems as if he has more faith in Brock Purdy, as Brock Purdy becomes the lowest drafted quarterback to ever start in the Super Bowl. He was pick number 262 in the 2022 draft. Now, some of the names that have started in Super Bowls that have obviously reputable careers, obviously I'm going to mention Tom Brady, the 199th pick in his draft, and then it was Bart Starr, Hall of Famer for the Green Bay Packers, Super Bowl champion for the Green Bay Packers, picked at the 200th selection. So it's not like there has never been any success for a quarterback drafted so late, but I think that obviously the draft stature given when he was picked and just the prospect pedigree almost that we look at with a lot of these guys, people are going to be hesitant about Brock Purdy because of where he was drafted, because of the system that he plays in. And specifically with the system, I wouldn't say that it's an unfair critique saying that he has all this talent around him, but I do sort of take issue with the argument that a lot of people made, specifically when Purdy was in this MVP race during the season. Now, I would have never had him necessarily as the MVP candidate because I think that Christian McCaffrey is honestly the more valuable player in that offense. But I didn't like this whole argument, people saying run after catch yards and all that stuff where Purdy just has to make simple throws short, and he just happens to be in this offense where guys can take plays to the house. Every quarterback that has been in MVP consideration, and some of these great quarterbacks, has had weapons at one point or another. And really, when you break into the stats, it's not like it was an overwhelming amount in the favor of Brock Purdy gets so much more help than every other quarterback in history has. It was pretty average, the amount of support that he was getting as far as run after catch yards. So he becomes this very big story because of where he was selected in his draft, because he is really the key difference in the 49ers roster as a whole, and why people think that the 49ers can win this game when they lost in the past. On a show that I had last week, a 49ers fan was in the chat talking about how that is the difference maker, that it's not Garoppolo this time, and maybe that's a little bit unfair to Garoppolo, but I think that this offense, you've seen it all year long with their players going out of their way really to give Brock Purdy the props and to sort of try and let the nation know that they think that Purdy is the guy. Trent Williams, after his interview in the Packers game, I believe it was one of these two playoff games, he said that Purdy's our guy. He's been the guy. He's the reason we're here. And you've seen George Kittle after the Thursday night performance when he was interviewed after the game. He just bestowed so much faith on Brock Purdy, which I think should say something. Now, what are they going to badmouth their own guy? No, of course not. But I think that becomes obviously one of the big storylines of this Super Bowl. And, I think that as much as I think for the 49ers, if they're going to win this game, it has to start on the line of scrimmage with the run game. It is Brock Purdy that he's going to have to make some plays for them. The question is whether or not he will be able to make them against a very talented secondary with the Kansas City Chiefs. So we will be talking about the Super Bowl all week this week. So we are sure to be touching more on those subjects, more of the more nuances of the game. But for now, we are going to go a different direction. We're going to be taking a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to be touching on the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, as there's been a little bit of extra drama with some reports that have come out, a coaching hiring that was made by the Washington Commanders, who currently sit at number 2. So stick with us, and we will be more on that subject when we come back from the break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up giving some initial thoughts here early in the week for the Super Bowl LVIII matchup that is coming up on Sunday. Again, we'll be touching more on the Super Bowl throughout the week, but for now we are going to be talking some NFL draft with the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. There's been a little bit of buzz surrounding this situation where, especially as of this weekend, the Washington Commanders have hired Cliff Kingsbury to be their offensive coordinator. Kingsbury was at USC this past season with Caleb Williams, and now he's making the jump back into the NFL. There was a lot of weird stuff going on behind the scenes, actually, with this hire, because it sounded like Kingsbury was initially headed to Vegas to be with the Raiders, but then pulled his name out from consideration of that position and is moving to Washington instead, which I'm curious what went on behind the scenes. I feel like, at least to some degree, there's probably a factor of the Raiders have a very big question mark at the quarterback position there. Yes, they have Devontae Adams, who is one of the best receivers in the league, but there's still a lot of unknowns, I would say, coming out of that Raiders locker room. Josh Jacobs, they did sign him to in a contract early in the year last year. But I think overall, outside of Michael Mayer, who they drafted in the one of the first 2 rounds last year, the tight end out of Notre Dame, who I think should be a very good player and definitely showed flashes throughout the season after a little bit of a slow start. There's not too much long-term stability with that Raiders job, whereas I know that we're talking about the Commanders, who have never really historically, at least of the 2000s, haven't been very well known for stability at all, but they have the number 2 draft pick in this upcoming draft. Now, whether or not it's Caleb Williams or Drake May or Jaden Daniels or one of these quarterbacks, Kingsbury should be coming into a system with a little bit of a fresh start with a new quarterback. But that's where some of this drama sort of started ramping up, is with the Kingsbury hire and the Commanders being very, very open about the fact that they need a solution at quarterback, and the fact that they are right within striking distance of being able to put together about just as good of a package for that number 1 pick in Caleb Williams as anybody else in the NFL can, just based off of this season's draft capital. And I think that it also sort of comes into play that there's been some buzz about Caleb Williams not wanting to play for the Bears. And I know that the Bears are another organization that haven't necessarily been the most put together, but I don't think that this is a bad situation that a quarterback could fall into as far as a number 1 pick goes. Now, Caleb Williams and his father and his camp all put out the idea of the fact that he has another year of eligibility, Caleb Williams does, so that if he didn't like the team that was going number 1 overall, he could potentially go back to college, make NIL money, and wait it out another year. And during the course, I mean, at first when they were saying all this, his father said that he was going to want stake in the team, that like part ownership or something like that, when he was coming into this year. And this season obviously was not quite what the Williams family had in mind coming into the season. Caleb was still good, but USC struggled. Their defense really held them back, and Caleb himself sort of put more on tape that could be interpreted as negatives. So he is still slated to be the number 1 overall pick. He's still, by most accounts, projected as a generational talent at quarterback, but it's just not quite as clear-cut necessarily in terms of him being this can't-miss prospect. So the Bears get the number 1 pick. Supposedly there is some buzz that he doesn't want to go to the Bears. Now, there was this one Twitter account that sort of put this out there, and Emmanuel Acho, H-O, from FS1, he fully dove into it and bought into it, made a whole TikTok, and the Twitter account ended up being fake, so he sort of got duped on that one. But there has been a considerable amount of different people sort of saying similar things, so I don't know how much validity there is to whether or not Caleb is that against going to the Bears franchise. So, you know, they haven't come out in their camp themselves and said that it's true or false. So again, take that all with a grain of salt. But that is just sort of another factor that boils into this question of whether or not the Bears will be trading the number 1 overall pick. In my opinion, I think that they should keep the number 1 pick and they should draft Caleb Williams. It sounds like early impressions is that's what they are hoping to do. But again, if Caleb is so anti-Bears that he's not willing to play, then maybe their hand will be forced. But assuming that's not the case, I think that it only makes sense for the Bears to take him, reset that quarterback rookie contract. And if that's your only argument is the rookie quarterback contract, I disagree. Because the most important thing is getting a guy at the position. But I don't necessarily think that Justin Fields has shown that he can be a high-level franchise quarterback. And I like Justin. I came into the year not liking Justin Fields so much, but he definitely showed a lot more promise this year than he has in previous seasons. So I think that he made somewhat more of an argument for the Bears to hold on to him. But the fact that there is still that amount of unknown and he's going into his final year of his contract, so you would have to pay him. There's no such thing really as, oh, we'll just let the year play out, and if he stinks, we'll stink. We'll get a quarterback next year. I just don't think that's the gamble you can play when the quarterbacks next year are not supposed to be really anywhere as good as Caleb Williams or even Drake May is sort of on that level. We'll see sort of how the Jaden Daniels discourse goes throughout the course of the offseason. He's expected to really show out at the combine, so there's a lot of people saying that there's a real chance Jaden Daniels could jump up to number 2. But just as far as this year's quarterback pool in the draft, I think that you sort of have to take this opportunity when you get it, because the number 1 overall pick in the NFL doesn't come around very often whatsoever. So you have to maximize it. And sure, it would be nice to sort of cash out on the value there, get additional pieces to surround Justin Fields, but I just don't know if there's really that much faith in Justin Fields to have at this moment that would justify not taking the potential generational guy at the position. So, this is my opinions on the Bears specifically, but again, this little extra wrinkle comes into play with Kingsbury, Caleb Williams' coach for this past season, now being with the Commanders, and everything's so aggregated in 2024. But Caleb Williams posts a picture of Kingsbury in the Washington Commanders hoodie or, jacket, and says, "Congrats, coach." And, some people want to make it a big deal that instead of posting a picture of the two of them together in USC, or a picture of him at USC, they specifically, Caleb Williams, that is, he specifically went with a Photoshop picture of him in Washington apparel. Just sort of tying into this, again, random little buzz that he doesn't want to be a Chicago Bear. And is this dramatic and probably reading into things too much in the year 2024 on social media? Probably. But it just gives more fuel to the fire of making the argument of whether or not Caleb is trying to sort of signal that he doesn't want to be with Chicago. And I think that ultimately we are probably headed to a Caleb Williams being a Chicago Bear. They have enough draft assets otherwise, including their own pick, because remember, the number 1 overall pick that they have this season was from the Carolina Panthers trading up for the number 1 pick last year, and the Bears ended up having control this year. So they still have another top 10 pick where you can go and you can draft one of those elite receivers that are in sort of the upper echelon of this year's draft. Marvin Harrison will likely be gone by the 8th overall pick, but there's Malik Neighbors, there is Rome Odunze. There's a lot of talent up towards the top of this draft as well that I think you can surround Caleb Williams with DJ Moore and Cole Kmet and whoever you choose to take, ideally a weapon with that 8th overall pick. I mean, if they drafted Brock Bowers, the tight end out of Georgia, I don't even think that would be a terrible move. Yes, you already have Cole Kmet, but I think that Bowers is somebody who, very polarizing guy. He's going to go in the first round, but a lot of different scouts have him at different positions in the draft. It's weird being a tight end, but I think that he's one of those players that he's such a good receiver that he almost transcends that lock on positional value, you could say. So the point is their offensive line needs to get better, but there could be worse. I think that Caleb Williams, he has much more arm talent than Justin Fields, in my opinion, but they are sort of similar in the mobility, some of the tendencies to hold on to the ball a little long, and I think that it would make a lot of sense. This Bears franchise has never had a quarterback throw for over 4,000 yards in the season. The only team in NFL history yet to do so. I think when you're staring at this golden opportunity, you have to take it. Could it be interesting if they happen to fall in love with a Drake May or a Jaden Daniels and potentially jump at the Commanders' opportunity to go back one pick and still get their guy for the future while getting some extra assets? I mean, it's interesting. It's possible. I think that the whole Kingsbury thing is maybe slightly overblown based off of the fact that it's not like Kingsbury is going to be head coach. He's just going to be offensive coordinator there. So it's not like he has necessarily all this power. But if you do look back at the history of Kingsbury and the way that he has positioned himself, he came in from Texas Tech job to his first head coaching job in the NFL with the Arizona Cardinals. And he drafted Kyler Murray with the number one pick, somebody that he had a little bit of a personal relationship with. He drafted him with that number one pick just a year after the Cardinals used their first round pick on a different quarterback, Josh Rosen. That was clearly the right decision, but again, just sort of also goes to show that Kingsbury, when he is in an NFL front office in any sort of situation, he is not scared to sort of take that gamble on doubling down on a quarterback and seeing what happens from there. So who knows, really? I feel bad for Justin Fields in this whole thing because he does still have a lot of potential. You see it with his legs alone and the way that he runs. It's obviously not ideal, and that's why I haven't been a huge fan of him up to a certain point. Is he definitely raises your floor with the flat-out athletic ability, and he is able to provide something on a constant basis. But I think making him your franchise quarterback, if you're so reliant on your legs, and who knows, Lamar Jackson, that's sort of what he was early in his career, but he added the arm to his game. Is it still, an elite arm? Not necessarily, but he makes plays. I know this is a little bit of a tough conversation coming off of the Ravens' loss where they didn't run it and were relying on Lamar's arm more. That was a very good Chiefs defense, and his offensive line, again, did absolutely nothing for him in that game. So a little bit of a Lamar tangent there. But I don't think that Justin Fields' NFL career is over. I think that the Bears could probably get day one, day two pick probably for Fields. I think that the Atlanta Falcons that's the team that's probably been linked to him the most from what I've seen, is a team that isn't quite in that, top 3, top 5 range to even make the trades that they need to move up. But someone outside of that, the Raiders possibly, the Saints possibly, could all be landing spots for Justin Fields. And, I think that it'll be fun. He needs this fresh start, I think, somewhere else. I know that he liked it in Chicago, but just a lot of sort of turmoil, the way that this whole thing is played out, especially on social media. If you see within the Chicago Bears fandom, there is a lot of polarization about this topic. So, I think it'll be fun having that chip on your shoulder type player. He absolutely deserves another chance, but I think this is too big of an opportunity for the Bears to possibly make an upgrade at the position and save themselves the very large payday they would have to give to Fields if they do decide to stick with him. So we'll definitely be getting more on this NFL draft talk as the time comes, but there was just this little extra bit of juice that was getting in with the Kingsbury hire over the weekend, And with, again, that stupid social media stuff that goes on that we read into definitely more than we should. So that is it for that. We are going to be taking another break. And when we come back on the other side, we're going to be getting into some NBA with the trade deadline coming up this week. So I will be giving my thoughts on which teams I think should be making moves. So stick with us for that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just wrapped up talking some NFL, did Super Bowl, did a little bit of NFL draft, and the Caleb Williams sweepstake. Now we are going to be shifting gears to the NBA as the trade deadline is approaching. It is set to be on Thursday, February 8th. So as we sort of close in here, it hasn't been super eventful up to this point. You have Pascal Siakam being traded, and you have OG Anunoby being traded. So the Raptors specifically have gotten involved, but other than that, not all too much. And it seems like this could be a little bit of a quieter trade deadline, but I do think that despite maybe the lack of superstar talent, and it's always going to be hard to follow a trade deadline like last year where Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are traded in the same week, but we could still see, I think, some significant moves coming from some of these fringe teams that could be on the cusp of stronger contention. I think that this is a very good deadline as far as role players, which again, I know doesn't catch the eye necessarily as much as some of these other star players such as last year. I mean, last year was just a different level where, again, I don't like how the NBA trade deadline comes right before the Super Bowl. It's a lot of overlapping. I think that working sort of in sports media too, it is better when it's more spread out. But last year was crazy where Kevin Durant ends up getting traded to the Suns, and it was Super Bowl week, and all the national media was talking about was the NBA and Kevin Durant's trade and everything that came with that. So not going to be quite that level of superstar movement, but I do think that there are a couple teams that could really upgrade, and I think that we could see some significant role guys sort of changing teams. As far as teams that I think should buy this trade deadline, I have talked about it on the show in the past. I think that the Oklahoma City Thunder are in need of some physicality, some size, some strength, some height maybe. Chet Holmgren is having a very good rookie season for them, and I think that he has been an incredible addition as sort of why they've taken the lead that they have this season. They had a lot of the same personnel last year. I think that SGA has even gotten better, even though he was the most improved player last season. I think that Jalen Williams, J-Dub, as opposed to J-Will, the other Jalen Williams, J-Dub has really taken a step as well as far as his efficiency. I just love watching that team. I think that they're deep. I think they have a ton of guys that can help contribute, but they don't necessarily have the size. And we saw it last year when they made the play-in tournament. They weren't even giving center minutes in these play-in tournament games where they actually had a chance to make the playoffs. Now they have Chet, which is a very great addition. He can stretch the floor for them. He's a good interior defender. He gives them a lot of what they need. But it's a lot to ask one guy who, it was sort of a freak injury that he suffered before the season even started last year, but someone who missed his entire first season and now is coming in and is being asked to be the sole big man that you guys are putting out there. Now, the other Jalen Williams, J-Will, stick with me, he has been getting some more minutes, but he's still not necessarily a high-level contributor. I don't think that him playing playoff minutes necessarily is a great sign for the Thunder going forward. I think they could definitely make an upgrade at that position, and the level of how much you want to upgrade is sort of in the hands of them. The two names that I've really sort of seen be the fit are some combination of either Nick Claxton, who's on an expiring contract with the Nets, who have been very bad, so they can make a move. It's a matter of, are you going to want to pay him after this year? They're going to have a lot of guys to pay in the next few seasons. Or even a Daniel Gafford from the Wizards, who you could probably get with all of the draft capital they have. They could get either one of these guys, and I think that it would be pretty seamless for them. Now, if I'm a Thunder fan, I'm probably somewhere online in the trade machine trying to figure out a way to get one of the Cleveland Cavaliers big men. I think that Jared Allen is somebody that I thought would have been a really good fit for them for a lot of this year, but the Cavs have really picked themselves up, and because of that, I think that it's going to be hard to get the Cavs to move off of them, because let's see here, the Cavs are currently, I think, the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, so getting them to move off of a guy like Jared Allen is probably tough at this point, although I think that there is a little bit of redundancy when that team is fully healthy as far as Mitchell and Garland and Allen and Mobley. So again, a little bit of a pipe dream there. But I think that Chet is somebody who could easily slide to a 4 position if you're going with a double big lineup, or if you just want a bench guy like Gafford to come in and just eat some minutes, be some size, provide some physicality. I don't know if Gafford is quite big enough. I would have liked Claxton more in that role. But when they go up against these big teams that they're going to see in the playoffs, specifically Jokic, I think, and there have been some very good games between the Nuggets and the Thunder this regular season. I just feel like he takes it to another level when you get to the playoffs. And this is a Thunder team that, yes, they have the youth, they have the draft capital for the future, but if there is a chance to sort of take a stab at contention this season, overlooking it may be a mistake, because you never know when these opportunities are going to come up. And it seems like, yes, the West is very deep, but they could potentially have a real shot at contention. The other team that I think should definitely be looking to make moves is the Dallas Mavericks. Mavs are currently 26-23 and the 8th seed in the Western Conference. This is a team that I was not buying into coming into the year. I thought that defensively, they really didn't have any sort of perimeter defenders. And, they went out and they signed a Grant Williams to a contract who's a solid defender. But I didn't think that they were necessarily all that nuanced. I didn't know who was going to start at the 3. And they've had guys step up and be very impactful for them there, between Derrick Jones Jr., Tim Hardaway, maybe not the defense, but he's been providing that 6-man scoring. He is in contention for the 6th Man of the Year award. They've had Josh Green, one of their young players, first-round pick a couple years ago. He's been really sort of turning himself around and being more of a contributor, especially as of late. Not necessarily a wing, but Dante Exum's having a little bit of a bounce-back year for himself. And then I thought that the other thing was Derek Lively was a rookie they selected in the top 10. He was really their main center, and I thought that that was going to be a little bit of an issue as far as, again, contending in this Western Conference, that a lot of these top teams have tons of size. Derek Lively's been really good for them. And again, in a playoff series against Jokic, I think that there's a very good chance of getting exposed. But he's done a lot for this Mavs team this year, and I think that he's only getting better as the year goes on. He's a great energy guy. He's great in the paint on both ends. He's a rebounder on both ends. He's been really good for them. So I like all of that, but I do think that they're still a wing short. and there are a couple guys that they've potentially been linked to. Dorian Finney-Smith, one of the guys they actually traded to the Nets last year to get Kyrie Irving. And Jeremy Grant's another one that very expensive, so I'm not sure if having him, Kyrie, and Luka all on the books is necessarily a great thing long term. But as far as competing this year, I think that it would absolutely make them better, and I think that they are still a little bit in this position of needing to prove themselves to Luka Doncic that he should want to stay long term. And bringing in Kyrie was great. Kyrie seems more bought in than he has been in any of his previous destinations. We'll see how long that lasts, because you never really know with Kyrie, but they seem to be happy right now, and I think that they have an opportunity here to potentially go get a wing guy from one of these worst teams and make an upgrade. And I don't think that anybody really wants to face Kyrie and Luka offensively in a playoff series. Is that enough to win them 4 straight rounds? I don't know. But if you go out and you add a Jeremy Grant to the picture and you can sort of get your defense more in shape, they've had another team that, like I mentioned, I wasn't big on them coming into the year, but now that they sort of have established a little bit more of a hierarchy in terms of who their go-to guys are on offense and what kind of roles, like Maxi Kleber has come off the bench this year and I think is much better in that role as an energy guy. The defensive presence is actually pretty solid when he's not being asked to play 30 minutes a game and guard the opposing team's best big man. I think that they've sort of worked themselves into a pretty decent situation here. Now, teams that I think should sell, I do want to note that this is also a little bit of a weird trade deadline because of the fact that there's not tons of superstar talent in the upcoming NBA draft. I think that we talked about this a little bit last week. There's a lot of good potential role players with them in that lottery place, a lot of guys that can contribute to teams, but nobody that's going to fully elevate your franchise and be the next guy. I think that it is an important thing to note, because you shouldn't necessarily be just trying to sell low for the sake of selling low and making your team worse, because it's just not necessarily an option like that. You still want to maximize the talent or maximize the asset, I should say, of these guys that they'd be trading. But getting into this list of teams that I do think should be selling off some, the Chicago Bulls have been stuck in this place of mediocrity for a handful of years now. They are currently the 9 seed with a 23-27 record. They've had some high moments, a nice emergence of Kobe White as one of a real guys for them. I think that he should very strongly be in consideration for the Most Improved Player award, but they just found out that Zach LaVine has to get surgery on his foot, so he's going to be out for the rest of the season. He was somebody that was in a lot of trade talks, and now that they're not going to get anything for him, you're probably not going to be anything in the playoffs. You should try and make this season be worth something in some sense, because what is another play-in tournament and not making the actual playoffs really doing for you? They've made the playoffs just once since 2018, so it's sort of tough to just justify trying to stick in that mediocrity range, because this isn't baseball or something where, yes, the Miami Heat did obviously just make the finals as an 8 seed last year, but that's not what we see. It's typically the best teams in basketball are the teams that go on to, make these real finals runs. And I don't think that anybody would really in their right mind argue that the Chicago Bulls are one of the best teams in the NBA. So that leaves DeMar DeRozan, somebody who I think could definitely be a contributor somewhere else. He has the reputation behind him. He has a little bit of a contract behind him as well, but he could definitely go and contribute somewhere. But I think the more intriguing asset actually that they have is Alex Caruso, who has been great for them as a defensive enforcer. He's just the perfect plug-and-play guy. I think every team could benefit from having Alex Caruso. DeRozan's great. It's just a lot of him in crunch time, and this is also the Chicago Bulls, who don't really have all that other talent, but he can be a little bit of a void, I feel like, at times. He's taken steps with playmaking, but I feel like down the stretch of games, it's a lot of him. Would he be willing to sort of buy into giving the ball up more in other places? Who knows? But I think Caruso is somebody on that sort of a contract that can really make a difference on another team. I've been saying as a Celtics fan, the last thing I want is for him to go to Milwaukee. I think that would make that he would be the perfect guy for them, who they already have their offensive identity. You're not really asking for them to, for Caruso, that is, if you're bringing it in, you're not asking him to revamp your offense. You want a point of attack defender on the perimeter. He's one of the best shot blockers in the league. Like, actually, if you look at the statistics, and as a guard, he's just so valuable from that defensive end. So I think that he would be huge for the Bucks. Hopefully they don't have the assets to get him, but Caruso would be somebody, if I'm a contending team, I'm at least making calls about. The Detroit Pistons, they have Bojan Bogdanovic. I think that he's someone that, again, could be a little bit underrated, but a real contributing piece. I've loved the idea of the fit of him on the Lakers. He has size. He can shoot the ball. He can be, again, at least offensively, a little bit of a plug-and-play guy. And the Pistons are in this weird spot where they've been sort of flirting with the idea of trying to make more contention moves, and not contention moves necessarily, but moves that would make them better today. They are supposedly possibly in on DeJounte Murray, and they made a move earlier a couple weeks ago, moving on from a young asset in Marvin Bagley, who may be a little bit of a not great contract, but he's looked pretty solid in Washington since then. But they bring in Mike Muscala and Danilo Gallinari to try and just help them win a little bit more. And I think they should be looking to sell, specifically Bogdanovic. I think that they can get assets, and the Pistons are in a position right now where I think they already do have a lot of the cornerstones. I think that Cade Cunningham is going to be a great player. I think he is a very good player now. I don't think that he necessarily gets the credit he deserves because of how bad the Pistons are. And Jaden Ivey, although sometimes late in games he can be a little erratic, and that Pistons team as a whole can be very prone to turnovers, but I think that this is a perfect type of draft for them where it is more role player based. And I think that they should, if you sell off a couple games by trading Bogdanovic, get yourself better draft position. Again, it's not worth a full tank for, but you can put yourself in a better position to get sort of the cream of the crop, at least, of the role players. Now, we're going to have to take this break, but final thoughts would be on DeJounte Murray and the Atlanta Hawks. They're in a very strange position here with Murray coming up on an expiring contract, and this has not played out the way that they were hoping to when they traded 3 first-round picks and a pick swap for Murray a couple seasons ago. So that's what sort of makes this interesting, is he's on that expiring deal. You can't get nothing for him after giving up all the assets that you did. So you want to either try and lock him down or get something for him. But again, when it comes back to the price that they paid to get him in the first place, if you sell him off for a lot less, that's also admitting as a front office that you screwed up and you are getting less for it in return. That's how people lose jobs. So I think they're in a very interesting limbo situation here. And I would probably expect Murray to be traded, but his value is nowhere near the level, not even just contract-based, play-wise, the defense we've seen fall, and he's just not quite as highly touted as he was when he was initially being traded. So very interesting position that the Hawks are in, definitely one that I feel like we could be talking about later this week if they do decide to move him, but I guess we'll just have to see as that comes. So we're going to be taking our final break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be moving into some baseball and the Boston Red Sox, who have had a pretty an eventful, uneventful offseason, you could say. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up talking some NBA and the upcoming trade deadline. Now we're going to be moving on to some baseball and a topic that is pretty personal for me in the Boston Red Sox, who have been a very disappointing organization over the past handful of years. There's been a lot of criticism about the way that they have been running the organization, and I think that it is warranted. So we're going to be getting into a little bit the politics almost of how things have unraveled here in Boston. It's been a tough offseason for the Red Sox and Red Sox fans who were hoping that the team would be taking steps to the next level. It started early in the offseason. It was even late in the season where they made the announcement that they were going to be firing their president of baseball operations, Chaim Bloom. Bloom was somebody that they brought in a few years ago to sort of do the little things and almost small market the Red Sox back into their way of winning after some really bad contracts were given out following the 2018 season. Some decisions were made. He was almost brought in to sort of front the front office's decision to not give Mookie Betts the contract extension and instead trade him. So Bloom got a lot of flack, I feel like, from Red Sox fans because fans seem to believe that he was the reason that this organization wasn't spending money. I was sort of more so in the camp of, I think it says more about the organization as a whole that they would go and they would bring in this guy from a small market team like the Rays were, and he really helped shape up the Rays and their farm system and everything. And they were sort of making the statement then that they were not going to be giving out really expensive payrolls and they were going to sort of be working within the margins. They gave out, under Bloom, just one big contract to Trevor Story, who has really struggled with injuries through his first couple seasons here in the Red Sox, and we haven't seen the value pay off so much just yet. But part of the thing with Bloom was building up the farm system after the Red Sox sort of depleted it in the Chris Sale trade and the other moves. Steve Pearce, who maybe not a big name to a lot of people, but did go on to win the 2018 World Series MVP award. They go out, they trade for these guys and depleted their system, and as a result, they were ranked 30th coming into Bloom's tenure with the Red Sox. Since then, he has really built it from the ground up. They are seen as a top 10, top 5 farm system now, based off of a lot of different baseball statistics like the Bleacher Reports of the world, their Baseball America. They are seen as a much better core now, which I would agree with. You can see it already, some falling into the pro leagues with Tristan Casas, how he's come up the ranks. You had Ceddanne Raffaello late in the year sort of start to make his mark in the outfield for them. And I didn't love the firing of Bloom because we were finally starting to get to see some of these pieces that he put together come into place for them. And I know that Casas wasn't even a Bloom draft pick, but he helped do more than just the drafting alone. It was sort of reworking some of the developmental strategies at the bottom, the analytics departments. I know that a lot of people sort of hate on the analytics, but the Red Sox were so outdated by the time that he came in that it really seemed to make a difference, and it has been somewhat paying off. And then they fire him before his guys even really get to display themselves. I think was a little bit dirty, and I think that again it was just a little bit of a front for this front office that doesn't want to spend money and wants people to point the finger at other places. So that's how the offseason started to kick off with the Red Sox, and comes out in November where they talk about the idea of going full throttle. That's an exact quote that the Red Sox chairman Tom Werner gave. And then later on, so that takes place in November. January 16th is the deadline for Red Sox season ticket holders to renew their memberships and their tickets for the upcoming season. January 19th, the Red Sox CEO at Winter Weekend said that they were going to have a lower payroll this season than they did last year. And then January 31st, this story comes out about how the Fenway Sports Group obviously includes John Henry and all of the front office guys for the Red Sox. They were investing in the PGA Tour, becoming a partner with them. I'm not quite sure what their stakes exactly are, but this was a $3 billion deal that the Fenway Sports Group was a part of. So it was basically a giant FU the way that this all sort of played out to Red Sox fans, pretending that you were going to be one thing, waiting until, financially speaking, they could guarantee more income for them, and then shedding the reality that things aren't going to be quite what we told you initially. And Werner has gone back. He's tried to sort of rework this full throttle quote and make it seem like it is the Red Sox fans who were sort of taking it out of context and were making a bigger deal out of it than you should have. It's like, well, you didn't know what full throttle really meant when you were saying it. That's on you, not the fans, for listening to what you said. So it's kind of been a disaster on that front. And Ken Rosenthal, a very well-renowned reporter for the MLB, he recently went on a podcast, the Foul Territory Show, to answer the question, are the Red Sox actually trying? And definitively, he said no. As the question was still being asked, he said no. He said, not trying the way they should be trying. That's because the Boston Red Sox are the Boston Red Sox. We're talking about, obviously, the city alone, the big market, but the Red Sox are one of the more historic franchises in the MLB, and in a sport where there's not a salary cap and it's so much on the individual organization to pay their staff and to sort of manufacture these teams, they have not been doing enough. Now, they've made a couple moves this offseason. They traded Chris Sale and Chris Sale and cash for the Atlanta's second baseman, Vaughn Grissom. Grissom is a very promising young player, so I actually did like this move. Second base is a position that the Red Sox have really been struggling to fill for a lot of these years, sort of with stopgap guys, the Christian Arroyos, Luis Arias last year they traded for at the deadline. So it hasn't been really, it's been the weakness in a very bad defense. Now, it's not obviously just on the second baseman. Rafael Devers was horrendous defensively at third base this season, but the defense is a very big part of the story about this Red Sox team and the way that they've put together these rosters. They've been among the worst in fielding percentages for a couple seasons now, so that was something they needed to address. Grissom struggled a little bit in the field when he played some shortstop, last year, but at second base, he was a lot more solid. That's where he's expected to be playing for the Red Sox this season. So ideally should be a good move. Again, very promising, but for an Atlanta Braves team that has so much talent and is championship focused, he sort of struggled to find playing time last year. So I think this was a trade that made sense in both directions because Chris Sale, he obviously, Boston will love him for that 2018 playoffs run and that season as a whole, but since getting the contract extension following that year, he has very much struggled to stay healthy and actually pitch for the Red Sox. They send him to the Braves. Now, Sale looked the closest that he's been to, I wouldn't say vintage Sale. I think that we're past that point, but he was a lot better last year, but still dealing with some injuries, and I think that he is probably better off with the Braves where he can sort of rest a little bit more, and the Red Sox can press this reset button and get off the contract. Again, I know that I've been critical of their lack of spending money. I didn't mind this move in particular, but this also leaves an opening at the starting pitcher position, and that was something that their new president of baseball operations, Craig Breslow, addressed early in his time with the Red Sox. Has said we need front-end pitching. And they've done just about nothing to address that. In fact, they traded Chris Sale. They signed Lucas Giolito, who is somebody who has at least been available the past couple of years, is pretty much the best thing you can say about him. He has started in 63 games over the past 2 seasons, spent time with 3 different teams last year. He has a 4.89 ERA over the past 2 seasons, so he's been not very good. He has at least been available, and this is a Red Sox organization that last year they were struggling to even have any sort of starting pitcher rotation where they bring in Corey Kluber as their acquisition to help start on the front line. He starts on opening day as Sale is still sort of working himself back, and by June Kluber was out of the rotation, and by July he was pretty much off the team as they sent him to the Phantom IL because he was just getting shelled all season long. And the former Cy Young winner, it's just clear that it's past his time, and this is something the Red Sox have done the past couple of years, is try and give out these 1-year contracts to these older pitchers. They did so with Rich Hill the year before, who was actually good, and he was good last season, but they didn't retain him because he became too expensive for them, which is just a ridiculous concept to me. And now they're sitting in a situation still needing starting pitchers because last year they were going with multiple bullpen days, a rotation through, and they were at least lucky enough to have a Nick Pivetta, who was a starting pitcher but to start the year, but ended up coming out of the bullpen, was actually better out of the bullpen for a lot of those stretches, and he was giving bulk innings where he was pitching a lot, but still not technically a bullpen day, and they were doing 2 of those per time through the rotation when it got to, midway through the season and on. And it was just not, it was fine. It was fun. Pivetta coming out of the bullpen, he was pretty electric, and, he's been a fiery guy for a while, but it became really hard to stopgap this all the way through the course of the year. And now there's a situation where Jordan Montgomery, who just won a World Series with the Rangers after being traded halfway through last year, former Yankee, I might add, so it would give the Red Sox a little bit of extra juice if they had him and he was good for them. But he is, as Rosenthal put, he's basically just in Massachusetts right now, in Boston. I believe his wife works somewhere near the area. So he's essentially sitting in the Red Sox backyard, but there has been no traction whatsoever from the Red Sox of trying to pursue him, even though there's real interest from Montgomery himself of coming to the team. I think it would be a great addition to this Red Sox team, and they're just choosing to not spend the money. And it's very frustrating as a Red Sox fan watching the team that you do love operate like this. Like, it's tough love right now. I guess a little bit on the bright side here is that it sort of went under the radar this past weekend where the Red Sox brought in Theo Epstein on last Friday, February 2nd, to be a part of the Fenway Sports Group and help be a consultant for different things with the Red Sox. He was the GM when the Red Sox broke the curse of the Bambino in 2004. He was with them for the 2007 World Series. And he's been a very accomplished, well-renowned guy in the baseball world. He went to the Cubs in 2016 when they broke their 108-year drought, I believe it was, with a championship. And he spent the past couple years as a consultant to the MLB as a whole, trying to bring some excitement back into baseball. So he's very well accomplished, and they bring him in. The question is how much will he have a say in things? You know, they brought in Craig Breslow as their president of operations. Epstein actually gave Breslow his first front office job with the Cubs in 2019 when he was still there. So maybe he'll have a say in things. This should ideally be a positive for the Red Sox, but there's just so much negativity going on that it seems like nobody in Boston actually even cares. And the thing is the Red Sox have had some solid teams the past couple years, but they have had just such a lack, even when they were legit good in 2021, a lack of care to invest in the team come trade deadlines and everything. And I just feel like, you know, you're the Red Sox. You don't have to go out and throw the big bucks at everybody every offseason, but at least put out a competitive team, because you can make the playoffs, you can make the wild card game, and still have the city behind you. I think that honestly one of the best Red Sox moments of my life was in 2021 when they were a wild card team and they beat the Yankees, went on to the ALCS after beating a division rival Rays in a series, and they had the Astros on the ropes for a bit there. And they just have a refusal to even put that sort of effort into the organization now. And it's a shame. I think it's a shame for baseball as a whole, because yes, I obviously care because of personal bias, but I think that the league is always better when the Yankees and the Red Sox are good, and they finished 4th and 5th in their division this year. The Yankees went out and made moves. They trade for Juan Soto, and you know, they're more of a money-spending team that can backfire at times, but at least they're trying to help their fan base, and the Red Sox are not. And it stinks a lot. So this is probably going to be, because I can't imagine they're going to be making any sort of moves. Maybe they do go get Montgomery, but I doubt it. But this is probably going to be the last time we talk about the Red Sox until baseball season comes around. So we will be moving on from this joke of a franchise, and they don't deserve to get the national attention. So, you know, it is what it is. But that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow at 2. Thank you to the GSMC Podcast Network for allowing us to have this show. And thank you all for listening. So, see you then.